Sammy's Hill, a novel by Kristen Gore. The chapters don't seem to be numbered. They just have titles. So, the first chapter is titled Early to Rise. The party really started to rock when Willie Nelson and Queen Nefertiti began pouring shots. I downed one and felt my stomach immediately replaced by a large liquor bonfire that sped through my chest, its flames licking up the inside of my throat. Willie leaned over and whispered that Winnie the Pooh had the hots for me. No way, I love that guy. As I watched Winnie get down on the dance floor, throwing smoldering Pooh Bear glances in my direction, I all of a sudden felt myself floating. Flapping my arms, I rose higher and higher. Soon, I was at 30,000 feet and a bit chilly. I plucked the edge of the cloud nearest me and draped it over my shoulders, fashioning a cumulonimbus pashmina. Feeling quite stylish, I surveyed the landscape below. I checked in with the mountain ranges, the vast oceans, the tiny cities, the exceptionally long lines at the gas station. Congressman Francis, do you expect some sort of bailout package for Exxon? NPR's morning edition crackled into my consciousness to remind me that I was not a party-hopping sorceress, but rather a Capitol Hill staffer who only had 20 minutes to get to work. Huh? If I didn't do shots with Willie Nelson and Nefertiti, then why did I feel hungover? A brief glance into the kitchen brought it all back. Right, the bottle of wine from the 99-cent store. It had seemed like such a good deal at the time. Okay, 20 minutes. Considering I was supposed to meditate for 30, I'd have to postpone that until later. I'd also have to delay the 15-minute stomach crunch set, the do-it-yourself manicure, and the new dictionary word for the day. I promised myself I'd get to all that, but I knew I was lying. In reality, I would crawl home after working late, feeling too exhausted to do anything, but maybe test out some 99-cent tequila. But it was way too early in the day for such cynicism. As my dad always said, anything and everything is possible in the morning. I had never been a morning person. I checked the clock, 17 minutes and counting. As I fed Shackleton and began scavenging for clean clothes, it occurred to me how difficult these simple tasks would be without my right arm. What would I do if I suddenly lost it in some sort of escalator or escaped hungry lion accident? People laughed, but I lived only a few short miles from the zoo. So I took a moment to do what I always did whenever these neuroses attacked. I reached for a sling from my pile of medical supplies, fashioned it around my right arm, and continued my routine with this new handicap, confident that I would be the one with the last laugh when I was so ludicrously prepared for life without my right arm. Amazing, they'd all say. Can you stand how quickly she's adapted? Why, she's just as capable as she was before, maybe even more so. And thanks to my brilliant foresight, it would be true. I'd just nod and smile and continue my life as a well-prepared, one-armed genius. I snapped myself out of this daydream to concentrate on the extraordinarily difficult task of opening a container of yogurt with just my left hand. And then, as I gathered up my work folders, cleverly using my foot to lift my briefcase up to the table, I caught sight of Shackleton's mossy gills. Oh no, the mossy gill death sentence. I had managed to inadvertently murder 8 Japanese fighting fish over the course of the previous 11 months. I had never meant to kill them. In fact, I did absolutely everything by the book, but they still died. Mr. Lee, the pet store owner, assured me I hadn't done anything wrong. I secretly suspected he was keeping something from me, some critical piece of caretaking instruction or water purifying product that would keep my fish alive. Because whatever it was, by withholding it, he ensured my lucrative repeat business. He played the helpful counselor, however, and according to him, the Japanese fighting fish sometimes just lost their will to live after a simple change in surroundings. and performed a sort of fish-style harikari. 3 of them wasted away. 2 of them became grossly bloated, and Jacques, Moby, and Ballard had all developed mossy gill disease. I looked sadly at my 9th and longest living fish, the 6-month trooper, whom I thought had changed my luck. Shackleton, so named for miraculously surviving an unfortunate wintertime power outage that had turned his bowl into an icebound wasteland, stared bravely back. Amazingly, he had lived through being thawed out. I'd assumed this proved he was some sort of fish messiah, a powerful spiritual leader of the marine realm. But I should have known that even the mightiest of fish couldn't survive for long in my murderous clutches. I was beginning to obsess about the implications for my fitness as a future mother, if I couldn't even keep a tiny little fish alive for more than a few months, when I caught sight of the clock. 12 minutes. I quickly grabbed some magazines for the commute and rushed out the door, barely remembering to shed my sling along the way. The good thing about working for a senator I respected was that I felt like I had a chance to make a positive difference in the world every day. The bad thing was that I worked so hard I didn't have time to notice things like the fact that I was wearing 2 different shoes until I was already on the red line, rapidly approaching my stop. And the pathetic thing was I probably wouldn't have noticed at all if I hadn't caught the snickering glances of 2 perfectly groomed Senate pages and looked down to let myself in on the joke. In my opinion, it's not totally unreasonable to mix up 2 pairs of shoes of the same style but slightly different colors, like a navy blue and black loafer. Embarrassing, sure, but understandable, particularly if one didn't have a right arm to turn on the closet light while one rooted around with one's healthy limb. But a tan sandal and a bright red sneaker? I was fairly certain the only people capable of that would have to be somewhat mentally handicapped. Apparently, they could also be me. I decided to act like I knew exactly what I was doing and shot a pitying glance at the 2-page babes, a glance that communicated how sorry I felt for them, that though they were immaculately coiffed, they clearly hadn't heard about the newest look to hit the runways. And I who read The Economist for fun on the way to work because, yes, I was that smart and genuinely interested in what it had to say, also happened to be on the cutting edge of fashion. How sad for them, my demeanor purred. How fabulous to be me. With that work done, I exited the metro at Union Station and made my way down First Street to the Russell Senate building, holding my head high and silently cursing the fact that I didn't have time to run into a shoe store and buy anything that made me look less like a clueless fool. But I mused, even if I did have the time, there are some things money just can't buy. Janet, the ultra-competent middle-aged personal aide to the senator, glanced up as I entered the office. While talking on her phone headset, stapling a stack of briefs with one hand, and making a scheduling change with the other, in parentheses, difficult multitasking even with 2 perfectly intact arms, close parentheses, she also managed to smile at me. RG will be here in 5. He needs the committee brief right away, she said in her pleasant but no bullshit tone. It's all ready, no problem, I smiled back, trying to project confidence and professionalism before my first cup of coffee, which was no small feat. RG was office shorthand for Robert Gary, junior senator from my home state of Ohio. The committee brief was for the Senate's Healthcare Committee hearing on prescription drug plans for the elderly, scheduled to begin that morning. And I was responsible for the brief, along with shepherding the constituent slated to testify because I was a domestic policy advisor to Senator Gary. The fact that I had managed to become a healthcare analyst for a United States Senator at the age of 26 still surprised me, and I lived in fear that someone would realize how ridiculous it was to have given me this sort of authority and fire me on the spot. Born and raised in Ohio, I owed my passion for government to my mother, a political science professor for whom fostering interest in public service came naturally. From the beginning, I'd been an eager and enthusiastic student, and perhaps most significantly, my mom's only full-time one. Under her tutelage, I learned early that participation was paramount and that change could be just an effort away. Together, we'd drawn up campaign posters for local candidates, passed out voter registration forms, and canvassed neighborhoods for initiatives in which we'd believed. In the mornings before school, she'd help me read the newspaper and answered my questions. In the evening, she'd edited my letters to the president for spelling mistakes. It had never occurred to me that all this might make me an enormous dork. I loved it. I had begun taking up my own causes in grade school. I tried to protect the rainforests, adopt litter-free highways, stop animal testing, ship school supplies to impoverished children in Haiti, and generally save the world one bake sale at a time. In high school, I'd become obsessed with issues of free speech, railing against censorship and challenging the school newspaper to rise above it. I had written passionate papers about how freedom and rebellion represented the beating heart of democracy. I hadn't been above invoking these themes to denounce the tyranny of dress codes and curfews. I had run for class office here and there, but mainly devoted myself to general activism. It hadn't been until college at the University of Cincinnati that I developed a more specialized interest in healthcare policy. This interest had grown out of a particularly intriguing freshman seminar on communicable diseases, a seminar which had provoked both a passion for healthcare reform as well as a terror of the essential vulnerability and filthiness of the human body. From that seminar forward, a sore throat was never just a sore throat. It was much more likely the beginning stages of Ebola, rickets, or wasting disease. Since then, I had dedicated myself to doing the little I could to prepare for the disasters that were sure to befall my relatively defenseless body. I had also devoted myself to studying the complexity and flaws of the country's healthcare system. Its inadequacies and inequalities had offended and embarrassed me. I hadn't been able to understand how the government could continue to allow nearly 44 million Americans, most of them children, to go uninsured. I had been horrified to discover the price gouging that went on and the toll that it took on lower and middle-class families. And as my mother's daughter, I had resolved to do what I could to bring about change. While slaving away on my thesis, I had landed interviews with Ohio's 19 members of the House of Representatives and both senators. Senator Robert Gary had impressed me as head and shoulders above the rest with his thorough grasp of healthcare issues and his long-term vision. As he'd answered my questions and talked about his plans for reform, I felt a mixture of awe and inspiration. I'd sent Gary a copy of my thesis and immediately volunteered for his re-election campaign upon graduation. I had been flattered and terrified when he'd remembered me, complimented my thesis, and asked me to work with his domestic policy team specifically on healthcare issues. I had thrown myself into it, written a couple of noteworthy briefs, and after Gary had won in a landslide, been asked to join his DC staff, which was how I'd suddenly found myself in a position of real influence. Scary, but true. I barely had time to sync my BlackBerry and scan emails before Janet was buzzing my line. RG's here. He added a meet and greet with the teachers union, so you only have 10 minutes right now to get him up to speed for the hearing. Go. As I rushed to his office, I wondered if I would be able to brief him in only 10 minutes if I didn't have a tongue. I could probably come close if I was equipped with markers and flip charts and more advanced charade talents than I currently possessed, but it would be tough. I'd been told that I had very expressive eyes, though, so as long as I could use those... Ooh, no tongue and blind. Now that would probably stump me. How exactly would I go about... Can I help you with something? Senator Gary's sarcastic impatience put an end to my planning by alerting me that I must have been standing in his office looking like an entranced idiot for a good 10 seconds. After a quick calculation, I decided to pass on explaining that I had been musing a blind, tongueless existence and just get straight to the briefing. I'm here to prep you for the hearing, sir. Is now an okay time? He just looked at me for a moment and then nodded. He was tired, I could tell. He was a good-looking man, and I thought the gray flecks in his dark hair made him look distinguished, but the deepening creases in his forehead and the bags under his eyes just made him look ragged. He was a workaholic with 1-year-old twins at home, so that accounted for some of it, but I got the sense he was worrying about something else in the deep, portentous way he often had about him. His blue suit, white shirt, red tie uniform was crisp and pressed as usual, but I noticed he had a yellowish stain on the collar of his shirt. I promised myself I'd gently bring that up after we got through the briefing. He'd be grateful without being embarrassed. I knew just the tone I'd use. Okay, sir, your committee today will be hearing testimony from Alfred Jackman, a constituent from your old congressional district. He's 83 and suffers from a kidney condition that leaves him in intense pain much of the time. The prescription drugs he needs are unaffordable on his budget of Social Security and pension payments, so he makes regular trips to Canada to obtain the cheaper generic versions that should be available to him here. And Medicare in its current incarnation doesn't cover what he needs, correct? It doesn't come close, sir. And the price controls in Canada allow him to save, 40 to 60%? He shaves 55% off his drug costs on average, sir. RG was nodding, and I felt lucky all over again. That I worked for someone who actually understood the policy issues he was being briefed on. One of the major shocks of my 26 years was the discovery that a distressing number of the people holding the reins of our democracy were glad-handing lightweights. Lightweights, not RG, though. He actually cared. That's it. That's all you've got? This will be a disaster if that's all you got for me. And the fact that he actually cared was the only thing that made putting up with his bullshit worthwhile. Well, no, sir. I have a list of pertinent questions for you to ask, and I've also drafted the remarks you should lead off with to frame Mr. Jackman's testimony in the larger issue of the travesty our nation's healthcare system has become. I'd like to avoid the word travesty, Samantha. We can't just point out the problems. People don't like that. Do the remarks include a blueprint for the future? I loved that phrase. It always made me feel like an architect, which I had really wanted to be in the 3rd grade. I had even designed several projects to practice, my most elaborate being a shoebox village painstakingly conceived for the squirrels that lived in my yard. With grand expectations, I had perched it in the branches of the oak tree next to my bedroom, but it had been brutally shunned. I had always believed it was the squirrel's loss. Reebokville had really been a rodent wonderland, resplendent with zip wires and even a fire pole from the spa down to the Acorn Lounge. Of course, sir, your standard speech outlining steps towards a single-payer universal system. Good. This needs to go well today. C-SPAN's taking it live. You'll be great, sir. I'm not the one I'm worried about. This Jackman fellow has been fully vetted. I had spent approximately 136 hours on the phone with Alfred Jackman, his various doctors, Canadian pharmacies, you name it. I knew Jackman's health history better than my own. For instance, I knew he had a double-jointed thumb that throbbed when it was going to rain, but I didn't know whether or not I was still in possession of my adenoids. Were they or were they not removed when I was 6? My mom claimed the surgery had just been to extract my tonsils, but then why would I have named the doll I got that year Adenoida? It can't have been a coincidence, as pretty as that name was. In my opinion, Mr. Jackman will give tremendous testimony, sir. Tremendous? Really? Will it rock everyone's world? RG was capable of swinging from impatient irritation to playful ribbing in a heartbeat. This was a good sign, though, because he wouldn't have been teasing me if he weren't happy with the briefing. At some point, we also need to discuss the reception this evening, because there'll be a couple... I trailed off as I watched RG return to his emails and proceed to completely ignore me. After a few seconds, he looked up. You're still here? Janet stuck her head in the doorway. The teachers have arrived, Senator, she said with a questioning glance in my direction. Send them in, but interrupt me in 10 minutes with an important call. Of course. It was time for me to go. If I was going to point out the collar stain, it was then or never. There wasn't time to conjure up the perfect tone I'd planned. I contemplated aborting the mission. Maybe the stain on his collar made him look more of the people. Maybe I was a giant coward. Sir? RG looked up, annoyed. It's just, there's something on your shirt, sir. Something yellow, not white, like the rest of your shirt. I motioned helpfully towards his collar. He looked down and spotted it. Baby formula, got it. There, that wasn't so bad. He was even smiling at me. Strange that it seemed to be his mocking smile, but I learned to take what I could get. I started out the door. Thanks for the fashion tips, Samantha. I can see I've got a lot to learn from you. He was looking pointedly at my mismatched shoes. Fantastic. I mumbled something about a new style, but he was already greeting the teachers who were shoving past me, eager for their 10 minutes. I had 5 voicemails from the Capitol Hill Police when I returned, a representative sample. Ms. Joyce, we have an Alfred Jackman down here. He's setting off the metal detector, but refusing to take off his jacket or shoes until he talks with you. Please call us back when you get this. Could it be 9 a.m. already? The clock on my computer informed me it could in fact be 9:15. The phone rang accusingly. On my way, I shouted at it as I raced out the door. Ralph was on duty when I arrived, embarrassingly out of breath from running down the 3 flights of stairs to the security checkpoint on the ground floor. Ralph always reminded me of what I imagined a basset hound with an eye lift would look like. Lazy and sad, but with a perpetual look of unnatural surprise. We had found ourselves on the same metro train one evening months ago, and he had confided in me that his new job didn't hold a candle to the excitement of his previous stint driving the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile up and down the mall. But he had felt compelled to bow to his girlfriend's demands and exchange his hot-dogging ways for the more staid and respectable work of a Capitol Hill guard. Hey, Sammy, he drawled, your boyfriend's being detained. He jerked his thumb towards the guard office where, through the wire-latticed plexiglass, I could see Alfred Jackman staring at the ceiling. Did he do something wrong? Alfred Jackman was scheduled to testify before the committee in 13 minutes. Why were they hassling a harmlessly shriveled 83-year-old man with a kidney problem? I felt my demeanor lurch perilously toward outrage, but battled myself back to politeness. I can't imagine he poses any serious threat to national security. I smiled, but Ralph looked unconvinced. He's been real disrespectful. He a U.S. citizen? Oh, Lord, don't go all Ashcroft on me, Ralphie. Not today, of all days. Of course. Look, this is really all my fault. I was supposed to meet him down here when he arrived. He's just very old, you know? Take pity on us, I commanded in my head. For the millionth time, I wished I was a Jedi Knight and could employ the extremely persuasive mind control skills of the Force. And for the millionth time, crossed fingers would have to substitute. He claimed he's here for the committee meeting, Ralph asked, his skepticism obvious. I nodded officially. Very sad health history. He went through a lot to be here today. If you looked up professional but grave in the Tone Dictionary, you'd find my name next to Master of. Ralph laughed. I bet he did. Fine, be cynical, you tone-deaf Botox basset hound, but don't screw with my committee hearing. Come on, Ralph, I really need to get him in there. Can't you let him go? He couldn't have been that uncooperative. Ralph was shaking his head. Was he kidding me? Would the ACLU need to be contacted? Do they have an AARP branch? I glanced at my watch and felt a rising tsunami of panic. I clutched Ralph's arm and made intense eye contact. Ralph, the fate of our nation's healthcare system is in your hands. If you care about poor, uninsured children, if you care about suffering senior citizens, if you care about justice, well, then I think you know what to do. I could practically hear the faint chords of the Battle Hymn of the Republic echoing in the background as I stared pleadingly into Ralph's eyes, silently willing him to do the right thing. And he answered duty's call with an explosion of hysterical laughter. "You're too much," he gasped between guffaws. "I love you once fresh off the bus." I smiled tightly. "May I escort Mr. Jackman to the committee room now?" Ralph could hardly breathe. Poor uninsured children. He dissolved into unmanly giggles. "Yeah, go ahead and take him." Ralph waved me away. "Good luck with that." I turned my back on the hilarity and hurried over to Alfred Jackman. I rushed into the booth, hoping Ralph hadn't alienated our star witness too much. "I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding, Mr. Jackman. If you'll just come with me." I stopped short as I detected a familiar smell in the small office. Good Lord, had the guards been smoking pot in here? Did that explain Ralph's paranoia and uncontrollable giggling? Oh no, was I supposed to report that? I wasn't cut out to be a narc. I quickly decided to pretend I had a cold, or that I had lost my sense of smell in a chemistry experiment gone tragically awry. It could have happened. Still could. Best practice for that possibility by not smelling anything. Certainly not the unmistakable scent of marijuana saturating one of the guard shacks of the Capitol Hill Police. "So, I hope you weren't too inconvenienced," I soldiered on. Alfred Jackman looked up at me with bloodshot eyes arranged in a loopy stare. "Looky here, it's a pretty lady," he grinned goofily at me. "Do you ever feel like you could just sit and stare at wallpaper for days and days? It's so beautiful." Even as I noted the bottle of Visine sticking out of Alfred Jackman's pocket, I clung desperately to denial. But he wouldn't stop talking. "Are there going to be any nachos at the hearing? I took a little something to calm the nerves, but now I'm afraid I've got a bad case of the munchies." Denial cut me loose. The 83-year-old kidney patient I had handpicked to persuade the Senate Healthcare Committee to embrace Senator Gary's prescription drug proposal. This tiny grizzled grandfather of 12 sitting before me was baked out of his head. Chapter 2. July's Highs. Just stay calm, I told myself. Address the problem in a level-headed way. "I wasn't aware that you smoked," I managed to croak. "Oh, not cigarettes. I never touch cigarettes. Those things will kill ya." "I do love the ganja, though." There it was. "Do you like the ganja?" I heard Alfred Jackman ask me as I tried to slow my hyperventilating. "Okay, take control. I could handle this. Or I could run." I caught sight of Ralph still laughing by the metal detector. He gave me a thumbs up. "No, Mr. Jackman, I don't like the ganja," I replied in a voice so high-strung it vibrated. Was I being totally honest here? "Too bad. I've got top-grade quality stuff from Canada. You should try it." I needed to sit down for a couple months. "I thought you went to Canada for your Lipitor and Nexium and the other prescription drugs you need," I flung at him accusingly. "That's what you told me. That's what I signed up for." He looked a little hurt, in a really stoned way. "I do," he replied, "but the pot's real cheap too, and it helps with the pain." I grasped at any remaining reserves of sympathy deep within me. This old man was in pain most of the time, that was the bottom line, and our country's lack of adequate Medicare drug benefits was making his few remaining years a stressed-out nightmare. If he got a little TLC and a doobie packed with THC, maybe that wasn't such a terrible thing. I tried to look at this crisis with fresh, less vengeful eyes. "Cracker Jacks will be fine if you don't have nachos," he offered. My BlackBerry was buzzing a hole through my hip, and I knew before I even checked my watch that it was past 9:30. The hearing had started. I had to do something. As the press pool approached the checkpoint, I took Cheech Sr. by the elbow and led him firmly toward the committee holding room. When we passed by the double doors of the Russell caucus room, I saw the chairman in the midst of his opening remarks to the crowded, camera-filled room. The other senators were fanned out on either side of him, their dark suits and somber expressions forming a humongous, high-powered arc. Before we can make it past, RG looked straight at me. I registered the concerned expression in his eyes with a bottomless sinking feeling. It took all my strength to muster up a confident smile, but he didn't look comforted, which wasn't that surprising, since according to a vast amount of photographic evidence, my attempts at fake smiles made me look like a drunken stroke victim, which would have made me only a slightly better candidate for testimony than Alfred Jackman. We were at the door to the adjacent holding room. I turned to my Stone Age stoner and was overpowered anew by the pungent marijuana smell that seemed to be cascading out of his pores. For the first time, I realized there was no saving the situation. He could not go in there and testify, no matter how compelling his story was. And what should have been a major victory for RG was about to be rendered an utter disaster. Crap. Instead of leading him into the holding room, I steered Alfred Jackman further down the hall to a private restroom. If he hadn't been so out of it, he might have been confused as to where I was taking him. As it was, he seemed preoccupied with the effects that the cocktail of pot and prescription drugs was unleashing on his system. He shuffled alongside me happily, pointing out the purple dots he claimed were filling up the hall like warm, shiny bubbles. "And there's one right on your nose like a big violet mole," he said, as he lightly touched my face with his 83-year-old thoroughly drugged finger. "Thanks, I'll remember to get that checked out at the dermatologist," I replied, as I wrestled with the restroom's large window. It finally gave and opened up enough to allow room for an over-medicated old man and a soon-to-be-fired healthcare advisor to climb through. "Please let there be a cab. Please let there be a cab," I prayed to the taxi guide as I assisted Alfred Jackman with his landing on the sidewalk outside. In moments of stress, I often turn to a stable of very specific gods in the hopes that they might hear my direct and heartfelt appeals. How often did a deity like the taxi guy get prayed to? I counted on him rewarding my attention with a little love. Like manna from heaven, a cab came to a stop directly in front of us as we completed our window escape. I helped Alfred Jackman into the back seat and watched the cab driver wrinkle his nose in the rearview mirror. "He's very old and not feeling well," I officiously explained. "Could you please take him back to his room at the Hyatt Regency at New Jersey and Constitution Aves?" The driver responded with an extremely bored shrug. Alfred Jackman turned to me. "Are we taking a ride to the hearing?" he asked, while batting away some sort of imaginary atmospheric pattern he discovered in the cab's interior. "The hearing's postponed till tomorrow. I'll stop by your hotel this afternoon to go over the new schedule, okay?" I smiled brightly at him. He patted my hand. Sure, he said. "However I can be helpful, sweetheart." "No, really, you've already done too much." I handed the cab driver my last $10 bill until I cashed this week's paycheck, parentheses, which would then provide me with only slightly more than $10, good old government gets salary, close parentheses, and sent the dynamic duo on their way. Ralph was screening a tour group and only had time to give me an odd look as I burst through the front door moments later. Even if he'd been unoccupied, I doubted he would have asked me many questions. Despite our metro ride bonding, I was essentially just one of a legion of young staffers. He watched pass through these halls year after year, As long as I didn't set off any alarms, he really couldn't care less why I was re-entering the building when I was allegedly currently inside it. I rushed into the hearing room just as the chairman was saying perhaps we won't be hearing us testimony from Mr. Alfred Jackman after all. For the last time, is Mr. Jackman or any of his representatives present? I felt RG's eyes latch onto me like a hawk's, but I couldn't look at him. Taking a big gulp of sweaty committee room air, I approached the microphone on the table facing the panel of senators. Even completely sober, it was terrifyingly surreal to sense a room full of policymakers and journalists focus all their important attention on me. Mr. Jackman's been taken ill? I squeaked in a high-pitched, traumatized voice. Not the crisp, drippingly intelligent tone I had always felt sure I'd be able to deliver in such a moment. And on top of it, I was shaking. Fabulous. We're sorry to hear that, boomed the chairman. I dug my nails into my legs to try to stop the quivering before it provoked concern for my well-being. Yes, I heard myself continuing. He was present and prepared to testify, but suddenly experienced unfortunate side effects from the medicine he had taken for his condition. Okay, so far no lying. I begged the god of persuasive explanations to smile upon me. As the committee may be aware, Mr. Jackman has to travel to Canada to obtain the drugs he desperately needs to manage his intense pain. He's 83 years old, and this sort of stress leads easily to exhaustion. Despite that, he was looking forward to sharing his experience with the committee today, in the hopes that he could play a small role in improving the lives of the millions of his fellow senior citizens who are imploring their representatives here in D.C. to provide them with a comprehensive prescription drug benefit plan. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw some reporters scribbling rapidly in their pads. Could I really pull this off? However, despite his best intentions, Mr. Jackman was in no shape to testify this morning. That's for sure. Given the circumstances, he hoped he might be able to postpone his testimony until tomorrow. I stopped talking at last and held my breath. Perhaps it would have been a better idea to keep breathing regularly, but I was too nervous. And I had been the reigning champion of the lunch table hold your breath contest in 5th grade, so I felt fairly confident I could wait out the response without losing consciousness. The chairman adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. Was I turning blue yet? I was a bit out of practice. This committee hopes Mr. Jackman feels better and looks forward to his testimony tomorrow morning, the chairman intoned. Sweet, sweet breath. Ugh, stagnant air. I'd forgotten about that, but the important and unbelievable thing was that disaster had been narrowly averted. I nodded to the panel and backed away from the microphone, doing a victory dance in my head. I should probably have held off from the mental celebration because my lack of total concentration on backwards walking led me to tripping over a camera table and tumbling sideways onto a row of seated journalists. An extremely plump, middle-aged AP reporter broke most of my fall, and my flailing arm managed to clock a young man from the Washington Post sitting next to him in the face. I heard RG quickly ask a chairman a procedural question and silently thanked him for directing attention away from the crash. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I whispered to my victims as I regained control of my splayed limbs and renegotiated my relationship with the gravity. No problem, didn't feel a thing, the rotund reporter winked at me. I believed him, but his neighbor didn't seem so unscathed. He had a nasty scratch on the side of his otherwise handsome face, and his glasses were somewhere on the floor beneath his chair. It was clear from his distressed expression and blind man feeling his way arm movements that he couldn't see a thing without him. I hurried to help him, stepping hard on his foot in the process, and not with the soft, bright red sneaker, but with the unforgiving, sharp-heeled sandal. He yelped in pain and swatted at me, trying to defend himself from this crazed enemy combatant who had come out of nowhere, intent on mauling him. I knew that's how I had come off, but I was really trying to redeem myself. I located his black rimmed glasses and placed them placatingly in his hand. I am so sorry, I tried again. He put on his glasses and turned towards me, revealing himself to look remarkably like Clark Kent. I felt my heart race a bit as our eyes met, and I struggled to remind myself that despite the physical similarity, I wasn't really in the presence of a disguised superhero. Was I? The fact that he was a reporter prevented me from finding him too attractive. Reporters weren't my type. It's okay. Don't worry about it, he said unconvincingly. Oh no, I've cut you, I replied as I noticed the scratch on his face was beginning to bleed. I'd actually drawn blood. How horrifying. I glared down at my fingernails accusingly. That was no way to treat Clark Kent. I'm fine, he muttered dismissively, flipping through his notebook and finding another pen in his jacket pocket. He turned his attention back to the committee hearing, leaving me to stare helplessly at his scratched and distracted profile while Senator Rawlings' thick southern accent launched into a diatribe about Medicare somewhere behind me. As Clark Kent scribbled down some notes, I felt an overwhelming urge to touch the script on his face. I had a tissue in my pocket. Could I just blot away the blood? Probably not without asking first. Can I at least get you a Band-Aid or something? I whispered into his ear. I really need to hear this, he replied in a distinctly annoyed tone. Oh gosh, he hated me. Oh, right. Well, sorry again, I stammered at his turned away shoulder. See you around. I felt myself blush a deep scarlet as I fled the room. At least that meant I was matching half my footwear. I still hadn't recovered at 5:30 that afternoon when it was time to accompany RG to the American Foundation for AIDS Research reception at the Washington Hilton. An afternoon visit to Alfred Jackman's room had discovered him passed out, surrounded by minibar wrappers. I managed to convince him to hand over the remainder of his stash until he finished with his testimony by swearing I would be personally responsible for its safekeeping. The brief victory rush had been immediately replaced by paralyzing anxiety when I realized I had voluntarily taken possession of a large Ziploc bag full of grade A Canadian weed. I was acutely aware of its presence in the innermost pocket of the bag my trusting grandmother had given me for Christmas. As I hurried with RG towards the waiting tinted window sedan, I swore I heard the rustling of leaves and plastic as I walked, and I imagined everyone nearby could also hear it, as well as instantly discern what it was. I felt like the agitated protagonist in an update of Poe's The Telltale Heart. In this version, revised for the slacker crowd, my contraband bag of weed would rustle loud enough to drive me mad and reveal my crime. I was feeling queasy as I settled into the car beside Archie. How's Mr. Jackman feeling? He asked me with a raised eyebrow as the car pulled out of the Russell Building parking lot and into traffic. Archie knew something was up, but he didn't want to know the details, which, given what they were, was just fine with me. He'll be fine tomorrow, sir. There's nothing to worry about. I'm sorry about the delay. Good, was the terse reply. No need for further discussion. RG had far more on his plate than a few items that concern my area of expertise. He demanded intelligence and efficiency, and normally I was up to the task, if just barely. So far today, I had come up a little short. I took out the AMFAR folder. I've got the guest list with the people that need some extra attention highlighted. For example, Nick Simon's been feeling neglected. He mentioned something about not putting our money where our mouth was, and I assured him. RG interrupted me, Samantha. I looked up from my piles of briefs. Yes, sir? "Are you okay?" he asked a little gruffly. Oh gosh, he was pointing my bag. He knew. Had he recognized the rustling? Had Alfred Jackman squawked? That was it. I was fired. "Sir, I know this looks bad, but I'd like you to know that I've only smoked pot 5 times in my life, and the last time was over 8 years ago, and I never even liked it because I couldn't remember really basic things the next day, like my phone number, and I've never ever done anything else except for drinking, but only in a fairly responsible way." RG looked at me with an utterly bewildered expression. "You've got a nasty bruise." I looked to where he was pointing at a yellowish mottled mark on my arm just below the shoulder strap in my bag. I knew where it had come from. Clark Kent's sharp belt buckle had left its mark. "Oh, that. Yeah, I'm fine. Non-drug-related injury," I offered weakly. RG stared hard at me for a few seconds, then shook his head and began leafing through the Empire briefing memo. I sat gazing out the window, feeling shell-shocked from my all-star performance. I tried to think about how RG spent most of his time contemplating weighty national policy issues, so there was a small chance that my random drug history confession got instantly forgotten in the company of far more important thoughts. I was a moron. Alarm bells interrupted my descent into a self-hatred spiral as my BlackBerry's calendar reminder function noisily alerted me that it was the 121st anniversary of the Brooklyn Bridge. I silenced the alarm and mentally registered the holiday as RG kept reading. In high school, I had become intrigued by the big book of holidays that the guidance counselor had left behind her desk. What had started as an art house resolution to celebrate the less popular holidays like Arbor Day and Janitor Appreciation Day had gradually grown into an ongoing fascination with obscure anniversaries. Once I'd embraced the theme, I had found my calendar quickly filled, and the joyous upshot was that every day became a holiday for something. I celebrated them in different small ways, sometimes just by mentally acknowledging them, sometimes by doing more. For example, to celebrate the 14th anniversary of the publication of Deepak Chopra's first book and the subsequent birth of his self-help empire, I treated myself to the new Indian restaurant on DuPont Circle. For the Brooklyn Bridge, maybe I'd sleep in my I Heart New York onesie. Through the window, I watched the various embassies on Massachusetts Avenue blur past before we turned onto Connecticut Avenue and slowed to a stop next to a crowd of cameras, lobbyists, and AIDS activists. RG put the folder down and closed his eyes. When he reopened them, they were sharp and clear. "Time to work," he said with a genuine energy that impressed me. The least I could do was rally something similar. "Absolutely, sir. This is your crowd." He moved his hand to the door handle and stretched his neck from side to side. "Good job on the talking points," he added. I nodded. I knew they were good, and I had spent 2 hours on them. "And Samantha," he continued. "Yes, sir." He looked directly at me, the corner of his mouth hinting upwards. "You should really get out more." And he was gone. 100 hands to shake, as many promises to make. I took a second to try to compose myself, feeling more and more certain that it was an unattainable goal. Then I collected my BlackBerry, my briefings, and my bag of pot and followed Senator Gary into the crowd. Chapter 3, Summer Surprise. How Liza convinced me to join her for happy hour at the Irish Times the next day was still a mystery to me. She was my best friend and had managed a mildly persuasive argument about celebrating Alfred Jackman's 24 hours of sobriety. But 6:30 was way too early to be leaving the office, even on a Friday night. It didn't matter that RG had already left to fly back to Ohio for the weekend, or that Janet had gone home early for her son's birthday dinner. I still had to answer to myself and my mountains of unfinished work, and neither of us was easily pushed over. I compromised by deciding I'd have a couple beers for Liza and Alfred, and then head back to my desk for a slightly buzzed wrap-up. Everybody would win. So the hearing went great, Liza squealed supportively as she hugged me beside the bar stools. Yeah, amazingly, Mr. Jackman pulled it off. I still couldn't quite believe it. You mean you pulled it off? She loyally insisted. Liza was the only consistent cheerleader in my life, and didn't seem to mind this thankless and often seemingly pointless role. She also had an odd fascination with documentaries about reformed S&M enthusiasts, and was an avid Red Sox fan, so it had occurred to me more than once that maybe she was just a glutton for punishment. She was tall and angular, studiously stylish, and naturally gorgeous. I had met her at a fundraiser in Cincinnati. RG had needed food to go as he dashed out the door post-schmoozing, and Liza had been the caterer. After she moved to D.C. months later to handle events for the Mayflower Hotel, we had become close friends. Liza was the sort of girl one was alternately jealous of and shocked by. She was genuinely sweet and captivatingly attractive, but insisted on continuously stumbling into poor choices, mainly of the romantic persuasion, or in many cases the purely physical one. She went for preppy, jockey, unfaithful men. There were plenty of these to go around in D.C., and go around they did. Her latest had been recovering from a knee injury sustained during a weekend rugby game on the mall. He had insisted on buckling on a knee brace every time before sex, and then had left her for his physical therapist, a petite redhead who'd apparently been handier with the straps. Liza had felt at an occupational disadvantage, and was still bruised by the breakup. I, on the other hand, was overjoyed to be rid of him, and his penchant for trying to provoke me into debates over the merits of Hooters restaurants and all-male country clubs. To Sammy Joyce and Alfred Jackman, today's stars of the Senate. Liza clinked her bud bottle against mine and took a celebratory swig. I drank to that. Alfred Jackman had done a pretty good job. His marijuana withdrawal-induced grumpiness had been interpreted by everyone else as frustration with the inadequacy of the healthcare system, and the list of legal drugs he needed for his condition, along with their exorbitant price tags, had made a definite impression on the committee. Senator Gary had made his point, and Alfred Jackman was safely out of my jurisdiction, so the beer went down easy. That is, until Liza elbowed me in the side, effecting a sort of mini Heimlich. What? I sputtered. She nodded almost imperceptibly towards my right. I swiveled completely perceptibly to check out what she was signaling about, prompting another elbow attack. Ouch! Cut that out. I did see what all the fuss was about, though. The guy ordering a drink one stool over was undeniably hot. And not just DC hot, but actual real-world hot. He smiled inquisitively when he caught my eye. I immediately swiveled to retreat. Liza was glaring at me. Are you ever going to learn how to check someone out? No, I answered honestly. Liza sighed. She was a subtle, cool one. I brought something else to the table. A sort of unsubtle anti-cool, if you will. Sorry, I offered, but he's not your type anyway, is he? I thought goatees had been blacklisted. Liza had dated 3 goateed men in a row, and her sensitive skin had only recently recovered. She had lately been quite vocal about her new anti-goatee platform, one that I had readily endorsed, as I had always considered facial hair unsanitary. But I had the unsettling feeling that The way our new neighbor pulled his off might induce me to entertain some dirty thoughts. Not him, Liza whispered. Him. This time her phantom nod more accurately indicated a new bartender who must have just begun his shift. Okay, that made much more sense. He was hot as well, but in a more muscular, less trustworthy way. Right up Liza's alley. I was just beginning to wonder if our happy hour had devolved into only a man can make me happy hour when Liza refocused her attention on me. We'll meet them later. Tell me about the rest of your day, she smiled at me. And that was another great thing about Liza. She was just the right amount of girly. Guy aware, but not guy crazy. I had lots of friends who would pretend to be interested in a night of catching up, and then morph into giggly backstabbers at the first whiff of polo aftershave. Women who were lightning fast with a put-down joke or dismissive wave. Whatever it took to seem more pretty or witty or larger trusted to the nightly swarm of male barflies. But not Liza. She was loyal and genuine. Not in an aggressively girl powerish way, but in a sane and appreciated one. We spent the next hour talking and laughing, fueled by several more beers and hampered only by my niggling sense of guilt that I wasn't yet back at the office. No problem, I told myself. Wrapping up the work week was even more fun when I myself was wrapped up in a warm beer glow. After all, a happy employee was a more productive employee, and thankfully a drunk employee couldn't get fired if her bosses had already gone home for the weekend. I had just convinced Liza that I really did need to head back, but that I really would meet her later when I spotted a man in a wheelchair trying to make his way through the door. A table leg jammed next to the doorway was thwarting his attempts, as his front wheel kept bumping into it no matter what angle he tried. No one seemed to notice his struggle. Certainly no one was offering any assistance. Something in his grumpy determination reminded me of a sober Alfred Jackman, and before I knew it, I was on my feet and hurrying towards him, while Liza tried to get the hot bartender's attention under the guise of ordering another beer. I approached the patrons of the offending table, a young, buttoned-up couple on what seemed like their first date, and fixed them with a polite smile. I just need to shift you guys over for a second. No need to move. I exhaled as I attained a firm grip on their table. Before they could respond, I gave a quick tug, dragging the table clear of the doorway and out of the wheelchair's path, and in the process, upending the full pitcher of beer they'd just ordered onto the white silk blouse-clad chest of the startled woman. I stood helpless for a moment, trying to calculate these latest entries into my karmic account balance. Did helping a handicapped man make up for assaulting an innocent woman with cheap beer? What the hell is wrong with you? The man in the wheelchair demanded. Interesting. I'd been expecting gratitude from him, anger from the couple. He was completely throwing me off my game. I was just trying to help, I explained feebly, so you could get through the door. I can take care of myself. I don't need any help from a klutz. He barked loudly enough for the entire bar to hear. Right, okay, so maybe the beer-drenched couple would also have surprising reactions, but in a good way. I turned my attention hopefully and apologetically towards them. The woman was crying softly as she tried to cover the wet t-shirt effect of the spilled beer with a flimsy cocktail napkin that was nowhere near up to the task. Her companion looked bewildered and concerned. So I'd offended a crippled man and reduced a nicely dressed woman to tears. karma-wise, I was pretty sure it was down. My own eyes began to burn ominously as I felt the gazes of the surrounding clientele disapprovingly fixed upon me. The 3 beers I drank had, unfortunately, softened up my normally slightly thicker skin, and I knew that in this state nothing could bring a tipsy meltdown quite like the wrath of strangers. "I'm really sorry," I whispered to the couple. My voice had apparently been chased away by the surge of acute embarrassment swelling through my chest. I was about to turn and retreat back to Liza, parentheses, who was where, by the way, just watching me suffer, close parentheses, when I felt a strong hand on my arm. "Well, thank goodness someone got this night started," a voice above me drawled. I looked up to make eye contact for the second time that evening with the very hot, even for the real-world guy from one bar stool over. "Hi," I whispered, wondering if my voice planned on a long vacation. He smiled at me, and I felt my neck rash flare up. I'd always had very specialized physical manifestations of anxiety, uncontrollable shaking when self-conscious before authority figures, laughing fits in the presence of scary animals, and when confronted by extremely attractive men I wanted to like me, a severe neck rash. It began with a deep flush, which quickly dissolved into tiny red bumps that paraded from my chest bone to my ears. It was relatively rare. The guy had to really do something for me, and it was never, ever pretty. I kept a fashionable scarf my mother had given me in my bag for such emergencies, but my bag was back at the bar stool, leaving me no choice but to wrap my hands around my neck in what could possibly be construed as a whimsical gesture, but much more likely looked like a bizarre self-strangulation pose. Maybe he was into that. He had averted his gaze and was looking kindly at the shaken couple. "Why don't you give her your jacket?" he suggested to the man, who quickly complied, covering up his date far more efficiently than the paltry napkin had managed to do. "And why don't both of you have another round on me?" he continued gallantly. "That is, when the bartender's done hitting on your friend." He smiled back at me. I turned around to see that the bartender was indeed talking conspiratorially with Liza, who appeared to be writing down her number on a cardboard coaster. My annoyance towards her dissipated, replaced by extreme gratitude that she had been oblivious to my disaster, because that had allowed me to be much more satisfactorily rescued by... "My name's Aaron," he offered helpfully, sticking out his hand. "Sammy." It's a pleasure to meet you, Sammy. You were really sweet to try and help that guy. Unfortunately, he's a grouchy drunk in here every night. You didn't know what you were getting yourself into." "No, I sure didn't." "Now, can I get you a drink?" "Yes, you sure can." He was staring at me, looking more and more handsome by the heartbeats pounding in my ears. Handsome and expectant. Oh, right, time to answer him out loud. Sure, sock it to me." "Sock it to me? Sock it to me? Where the hell did that come from? Wasn't that an old catchphrase on Laugh-In? What had provoked me to say it, and the tone I'd used hadn't been playful at all, which would have saved it. It had instead come out in a sort of guttural way. Which just made me sound crass and demanding. That wasn't me. What sabotaging 70s poltergeist was channeling me from the other side. I decided to get my Ouija board revenge later, There was an image repair emergency to tend to at the moment. Let's see. Do they serve Klutz martinis here? I asked in what I prayed was a much more appealing tone. That's my signature drink. Aaron laughed. Afraid not. But I think they've got a Good Samaritan shot with a bad break chaser. He smiled at me. Sounds great. We made our way back to our stools just as Liza looked up from her huddle with the hunky bartender. She glanced at my neck and quickly and smoothly handed me the scarf from my bag. Liza, this is Aaron. Aaron, Liza. I fastened the scarf around my neck as they shook hands. And this is Ryan, Liza indicated the bartender. Ryan was certainly a looker, and at the moment he was surreptitiously looking me up and down. Oh, Liza, no, not another one. Ryan's going to show me some of the mixers they have in the back. I've been looking for some better deals for the Mayflower. Liza smiled at me as she disappeared after Ryan through the door behind the bar. Well, that worked out. Now I won't be being rude when I only pay attention to you, Aaron said. Nope, nothing rude about that. And even if that was a little liney, it sounded charming coming from him. Where's that accent from? Somewhere southern. Maybe a little south of heaven? I inwardly retched at my tumble into cheesiness, and was only mildly comforted by the fact that no one would ever know those words had existed in my brain. But I knew. It was time to pull it together. He wasn't that great. You work for Senator Gary, don't you? Aaron continued. I've seen you around. He had. When? Where? Had I known I was being watched? Had I been doing anything embarrassing? The chances that I had were distressingly high. Yeah, I'm Senator Gary's domestic policy advisor. I smiled brightly at him, trying to bind him with either my freshly whitened teeth or my relatively impressive job title. Wow, that's great. I'm impressed. Those crest white strips were a bitch to put on, but they really worked. And what about you? I asked, feeling a little more confident. It seemed as though he also worked on the Hill. I hope so. I wanted to be involved with someone who cared about the same things I did. But what if he did something really low level? That was fine with me, but would he be threatened by my success? I hope I hadn't emasculated him. That was no way to start the serious relationship we were clearly destined to have. I'm the head speechwriter for Senator Brahman, he answered. John Brahman, senior senator from New Jersey, ranking member on the most powerful committee in the Senate, early frontrunner in the presidential race, all-around major heavyweight, a jerk by most accounts, but an extremely successful one. We were just 15 fast months away from the election day that very well might make Brayman president. Aaron's ego probably wasn't too bruised. Gosh, that must keep you pretty busy. Could I be any more bland? It was dangerous to dare myself. It's challenging but rewarding, and it only drives me to drink every other night. He smiled modestly. Would I tell our children that his smile was the first thing I fell in love with? Assuming I could get a word in edgewise as their father smothered me with passionate kisses for the rest of my life. Aaron was checking his watch. Oh no, bad sign. Say something witty, I yelled at myself. Look alluring, damn it. I felt my neck flare stronger under the mounting pressure. Actually, Behrman's on 20/20 tonight, and I'm supposed to watch, Aaron said. There it was. I was getting the Heisman after a mere 10 minutes. Sadly, that wasn't even a personal record. But I'd really been digging him. This sucked. The thing is, I'd much rather stay here talking to you, he continued. Really? Plus, for the safety of the other patrons' outfits, I really don't think you should be left unsupervised, he continued. Do you mind excusing me for a second so I can make a quick call? I felt myself fall instantly and deeply into infatuation. To mark the occasion, I smiled goofily at him as he moved away to dial his cell phone. Technically, I was supposed to be returning to the office, but what if this guy turned out to be the love of my life? In the big scheme of things, which is more important, killing myself to succeed at work or finding a soulmate? The unnerving thing was that at this stage of my life, it was sort of a close call. I decided to use the phone call time wisely to come up with good conversation topics and prep some of my go-to stories. I knew I had a foolproof bit about water parks, but how to segue? Should I open with embarrassing cell phone stories? Certainly a natural transition, and I definitely had a bevy of them. But sometimes when I mimic the static crucial to such stories, I inadvertently spit a fair amount, and that probably wasn't all that seductive. I clearly just needed to get him drunk pretty quickly. I'm afraid I have tragic news. He was back. It turned out his frown was just as tremendous as his smile. It made him look sexily disgruntled. I couldn't get through to someone to tape the show for me, and TiVo's not returning my calls, so I've unfortunately got to head out. I'd ask you along, but I know a lady such as yourself wouldn't let me get to the Barbara Walters stage before we've even had our first real date. No, of course not. Babs is well on the way to second base. Exactly. I feel we need to build on that sort of intimacy. Maybe warm up with some good old-fashioned 60 Minutes. It's so refreshing to meet a true gentleman. Laughing, he took my hand and leaned down to kiss it. Till later, then. He smiled one last breathtaking time and was gone. Back at my apartment that night, I endlessly replayed every moment of my interaction with Aaron, mercilessly punishing myself for not coming up with the cleverer responses that seemed so obvious hours later. As I lay there festering, repartee, hindsight was 20/20 in more ways than one. I was also vaguely curious how Senator Brayman had done on the show. Probably very well. He was so polished and professional. One of his glaring faults being that he knew how polished and professional he was. The fact that he'd never run for president before was a miracle, given his soaringly high opinion of himself. I didn't have any personal experience with Brayman, but I'd heard plenty about him through the Hill grapevine since arriving in D.C. Though Brayman and R.G. had been elected to Congress the same year, Brayman had apparently devoted considerably more of his time during the ensuing decade to relentless pandering and self-promotion. His undisguised ambition, coupled with his aggressive maneuvering, had propelled him from the moment he was sworn in towards an inevitable race for the presidency. I had heard others say that anyone who really knew Brayman didn't mistake his motivations for a genuine desire to improve the lives of his fellow Americans. To the contrary, they understood that he was clearly in the mix for his own betterment. In my opinion, this made Brayman the polar opposite of R.G. in terms of integrity and style. And yet the very qualities that I deplored in Brayman were the same ones that had garnered him tremendous clout on the Hill. He held far more sway than R.G. did, as unfair as that seemed to me. I wondered how well Aaron knew Brayman. Was he aware of his boss's considerable shortcomings? I hoped that he wasn't, because I sensed I'd have trouble being with someone who willingly worked for such a tainted cause. And there could easily be a respectable reason for Aaron's ignorance, I argued to myself. Perhaps he was too new on staff. He was certainly far too good-looking. I decided to give Aaron the benefit of the doubt pending further investigation, since there was a perfectly good chance that he just didn't know the truth. Perhaps it was my role to enlighten him. Maybe once Aaron fell madly in love with me, I could persuade him to renounce Raymond, leave his job, and come work for RG, thereby effecting a harmonious merging of my personal and professional lives. A goal I had been feng shuiing towards for months. As I gazed up at the glow-in-the-dark constellations adorning my ceiling, I fantasized about all my stars aligning at last and drifted delusionally off to sleep. Monday morning came much quicker than I was prepared for. I had gone into the office for a few hours on Saturday and then spent most of Sunday rollerblading with Liza along the Potomac. I wasn't what you would call a strong rollerblader, and Liza had needed to turn back often to encourage me along. I never thought it was a wise plan to have wheels strapped to my feet, but Liza had insisted it was good exercise, and at the very least it was refreshing to have a better excuse for taking a few tumbles. Plus, the knee pads, elbow pads, and helmet were fun to wear. They made me feel very lethal and important, and when I closed my eyes, I imagined I was participating in something far more adventurous and risky. And given that my eyes were closed, that usually was in fact the case. I felt distinctly sore as I dragged myself out of bed, which wasn't a sensation I enjoyed. As I waited for the shower to warm up, I started thinking about an article I'd read about people who were born without nerve endings, which resulted in them not being able to feel any pain. I wasn't sure if it was possible to develop this condition, but if it was, I felt pretty certain I was not prepared for it. However, after a brief internal debate, I decided that the condition was too high concept to train for on a Monday morning. I opted instead to spend my shower time reviewing the proper defensive responses to various animal attacks. When I was younger, I had begun this training by arranging my stuffed animals in various stations around my house to help me practice. The rule I made was that I would go about my day-to-day life, but whenever I made eye contact with any of these stuffed animals, I had to practice my emergency response on the spot. This resulted in various episodes along the lines of me trudging to the bathroom in the middle of the night, stumbling upon my plush alligator, and feeling compelled to continue my journey in a fast-paced diagonal run, parentheses, since alligators could only run fast in a straight line, one had to change direction frequently to survive their chase, close parentheses. Or while clearing the dishes after dinner, spotting my stuffed bear atop the hutch and immediately dropping to the floor in a tight, impenetrable ball. My parents were briefly alarmed at what appeared to them to be erratic, Tourette's-like behavior onsetting at a relatively early age. Once I explained the training regimen, my mom gave me a subscription to National Geographic, and my dad suggested I get outside more. I had just finished dressing and was reviewing shark attack survival tips when I made eye contact with Shackleton. He stared at me woefully from his bowl, seemingly too tired to nibble at his fish flakes. His gills had become even mossier over the weekend, though a Saturday afternoon trip to Mr. Lee's pet store, had elicited nothing but assurances that I was doing everything right. This had only served to increase my doubts about Mr. Lee's overall veracity. I should have known not to trust him the first day I walked into his shop. How could anyone really believe that a man named Mr. Lee, who played the 50s song Mr. Lee on a loop over his store's stereo system, was interested in anything but his own bottom line? Poor Shackleton. I wonder what the chances were that he had a Japanese fighting fish version of the no nerve ending condition and was therefore being spared whatever pain his slow death was causing. I blew him a kiss and arranged my most beautiful Japanese fan behind his bowl in an effort to make him feel more at home. He acknowledged my gesture with a feeble flutter of his tail. My BlackBerry buzzed with an urgent message from Janet telling me to get to the office as soon as I could. No time for a sit-down breakfast. Luckily, it was the 81st anniversary of the invention of the Klondike bar, and I had bought a box of them over the weekend in celebration. I grabbed a bar from the freezer and bolted out the door. When I hurried into the office, Janet eyed my wet hair with the expression of a public health inspector noting a restaurant that wasn't up to code. She gave me a split second to feel self-conscious. Parentheses, though the wet hairdo special was hardly out of the ordinary for me, close parentheses, before nodding towards RG's office. He came in early this morning, asked to see you, she instructed as she turned back to the ringing phone. I entered to find RG at his desk, reading and finishing up his breakfast of a half grapefruit and a handful of vitamins, a breakfast so far inferior to my chocolate fudge Klondike bar, I almost felt sorry for him, until I remembered that he was the powerful United States Senator, and I was the lowly aide who was about to be, tested, reprimanded, promoted. I was fairly certain we could rule out that last possibility. I got a call last night from John Brayman, RG said after ignoring me for a good 2 minutes while he finished reading a news story. Really? That was quite a coincidence. Goodness, was word already out that Aaron and I were soon to be an item? It seemed unlikely. He was impressed with the way the committee hearing went on Friday, and he wants to work with us in a more official capacity, RG continued. He wants to co-sponsor the bill, I asked. That's correct. So I'm going to need you to bring his staff up to speed on its intricacies. Wow. We'd been angling for a high-profile co-sponsor because we knew that scoring one could give the bill the momentum it needed to pass, but this was a surprise. Brayman had never even been on our list yet. If he liked the bill and wanted to lend his name, I didn't see anything wrong with using him to get something good done. Well, that's great, sir, isn't it? RG peered at me over his reading glasses. Probably good for the bill. We'll see how great it is overall as we go along. I watched RG shuffle through his papers with a tightened jaw and felt troubled. Though I learned early on that senators often had to work in partnerships that weren't perfect fits, I could tell from RG's manner that he and Brayman weren't simply mismatched. I sensed an undercurrent of genuine dislike. What do you mean, sir? I asked, hoping for clarification. RG sighed. Look, I felt compelled to accept Brayman's offer for the sake of the bill, but I wish we didn't have to work with him because he can't be trusted, and neither can his staff. You'll need to stay on your guard. Oh dear. So Brayman's co-sponsorship wasn't great news, and worse, RG was explicitly warning me about Brayman staffers 2 days after I'd become infatuated with one. The feng shui dreams of seamlessly melding my personal and professional lives appeared doomed. But I wasn't quite ready to let go of the fantasy. Okay, but do you think that every single member of Brayman's staff is untrustworthy? I heard myself asking, without exception? I mean, wouldn't some of them be okay? Like if they had just started maybe, or if they were a fluke or something? RG's baffled stare terminated my tangent. Never mind, sir, I continued quickly. I was just collecting my thoughts, which I resolved to do in silence from now on. As much as I wanted validation from my hypothetical relationship, I understood that it wasn't worth sounding like an idiot in front of my boss, or sounding any more like one, at least. Archie was looking hard at me. "Are you up for this, Samantha?" he asked with the slightest hint of apprehension. Of course I was. I would do everything in my power to make this bill a success, which included proving I was much more competent than my recent display indicated. "Definitely, sir. You have nothing to worry about." Archie gave a satisfied nod. "Great. Now, don't let Brayman's people bog you down with their interest group bullshit, and keep an eye out, especially for any insurance stuff they try to tack on. That's Brayman's trademark. He and the industry go way back. But you've got to keep the bill clean of that crap. Let me know if you run into problems." With that, he returned to his papers. From Sammy's Hill, summer surprise continued. I got more explicit instructions from Janet about setting up a meeting with Brayman's people for that afternoon before returning to my desk to discover that my favorite coffee mug, the one with the magic eye trick picture of Snuffleupagus on it, had been stolen. I gasped in horror. I loved that mug. I had won it at an Ohio State Fair after successfully sinking 3 ping pong balls into a narrow neck glass bowl. My college beer pong skills finally paying off with a glorious post-grad triumph. That mug was one of my most prized possessions. I secretly believed it to be a potent good luck charm, which is why I had brought it to work in the first place. It had sat helpfully on my desk for 7 months, and now, out of the blue, I'd been robbed of it? Who was the culprit that would commit such a dastardly crime? I soon had my answer. Mark Herbert, Archie's recently hired press secretary, was leaning against the Xerox machine down the hall, chatting with some unseen conspirator and clutching my Snuffleupagus mug in one filthy stealing claw. He had come to the job highly recommended, but he'd been odd and aloof from the beginning. Now it turned out he was a thief. I knew I shouldn't have felt guilty for instantly disliking him. The sentiment had been largely based on his elaborate use of hand gestures to illustrate his monologues, but regardless, it was obviously justified. Should I alert Archie to the fact that he was willfully employing a criminal? I moved towards Mark's unsuspecting back, the Jaws theme pounding vengefully in my head. Stupid Mark Herbert, coming in here and taking my things, even if he was just, quote-unquote, borrowing it. He was still germing it up. What a jerk. He was mid-sentence when I cleared my throat. Yeah, listen, Mark, I know you're new here, so you don't necessarily know everything that goes on. But that's my special mug you're holding, and I'd love it if I could just get it back from you, thanks. There, I had successfully beaten back the hissy fit tone that had been welling inside me, and really had managed a very polite timbre if I did say so myself. I topped it off with a fake, therefore deformed, smile. He looked surprised. Didn't think I'd catch us so soon, did ya? It looked like he hadn't even had time to take a sip. That's right, sucker, that's how fast I am. Now you know not to mess with me. Mark's been making coffee for everyone this morning. His unseen fellow schemer was now seen, and she turned out to be Mona, the scheduler, calmly sipping coffee out of her Pi-Fi cup. I was just bringing you yours. Mark had now turned towards me. You, take it with lots of sugar, right? He mimed, putting in several scoops of sugar. I was pretty sure he hadn't put enough sugar in there to combat the bitter taste of my deeply inserted foot. Thanks, I offered weakly. Sorry, I didn't mean to suggest you were. As I trailed off, I wondered why he was the one looking embarrassed. And was I going to finish that last sentence? Probably not. I'd done enough damage. There was no need to fully vocalize my snap suspicions. I should get back to my phone. I've got a Harper's cover story to negotiate, Mark said quickly, handing over an unscathed snuffleupagus and holding his fingers to his head like an imaginary phone before scampering off. Mona was fixing me with an appraising look. I tried to deflect her gaze with an oops-oh-well shrug as I backed down the hall whence I came, but I wasn't quite quick enough. He has a crush on you, you know. What? Mona was nodding calmly as I vigorously shook my head. He does, she asserted. I thought at first he liked me, but then I realized he was only talking to me so he could find out about you. Mona didn't look as though she'd been overly pleased by that discovery. How could Mark have a crush on me? Besides some brief interactions that had showcased his affinity for miming and sign language, we'd barely spoken in the 3 weeks he'd been on staff. Actually, maybe that was precisely how he could have a crush on me. He didn't know any better. Oh, I'm sure he doesn't, I tried. He's probably just wondering how I managed to hang on to my job here. I laughed self-deprecatingly. Mona looked a little too thoughtful for my comfort. Maybe. Anyway, would you be interested in him? He's pretty cute. Okay, Mark was not cute, but the fact that Mona thought he was made me wish all the more that he would transfer his alleged affections to her. She was a bit brusque and prickly, but she wasn't a bad person, and she spent so much time scheduling Archie, I doubted she had much left over for herself. A romance would be good for her. I took a sip of my coffee. This is really good. Mona just looked at me with one raised, slightly bushy eyebrow. I've just started seeing someone anyway, so it's not even an issue, I continued, praying for the god of white lies to powwow with the god of potentially fantastic boyfriends and turn this mild fib into a fact as soon as they could manage. It was for a good cause. Mona looked relieved. Oh, well, I'll break it to him gently, she said. Is it anyone I know? Did she know Erin? Could she be a valuable source for the necessary background research? I doubted it, and regardless, it was too late to inquire, considering I was supposedly already dating him. No, I don't think so. It's going great, but it's still early, so I don't want to jinx it. I'm kind of superstitious, you know. At least the last part was true. Luckily, my BlackBerry buzzed me into work mode, and I smiled goodbye to Mona as I made my way back to my desk. With Snuffleupagus safely returned to his righteous throne, I reviewed my file cabinet of material on RG's prescription drug proposal and pulled the pieces I thought would be most necessary and helpful for Senator Brayman's team. The proposal was a good one, but it was bold and therefore sure to face a contentious battle for passage. Having Brayman on board would signal to everyone that it should be taken seriously. Flaws aside, we needed him for the bill. As things stood, the legislation was on track to gain committee approval in the next month, and then would go on to weather the debate and voting of the full Senate. I tried not to daydream about what it would mean if the bill actually passed, because there were so many hurdles along the way, but I couldn't help but get energized by the prospect. My brief time in D.C. had made me aware of just how difficult it was to effect positive change, but working for RG had also bolstered my faith in the potential for progress, and I wanted my confidence to be rewarded with a tangible advancement, something I could point to and know was improving people's lives. I firmly believe that a comprehensive prescription drug plan for the millions of Americans struggling to afford their health care would provide just that. After organizing the pertinent material for the Bremen team to my satisfaction, I mentally reviewed RG's advice about dealing with them. He had mentioned that I should watch out for interest group bullshit, and referred specifically to Bremen being cozy with the insurance lobby. I had heard other rumors to that effect, but until now had never had any reason to look deeper into them. I knew RG's healthcare positions inside and out, but I was still learning the ropes when it came to the other 99 senators. Since RG had been too busy to elaborate, I Googled my way to the relevant information. Evidently, Bremen's father had made the family fortune in medical insurance, and John Bremen Jr. had continued to foster these relationships, despite the occasional conflict of interest with providing affordable medical coverage for his constituents in the lower and middle levels of the income brackets. From the articles that I scanned, it seemed that Bremen was a bit of a hypocrite on the issue, championing the need for reasonably priced health care, yet perpetually making deals with various insurance companies that consistently drove up premium prices. These very insurance companies in turn provided continual funding and support for his campaigns. From what I could gather, Bremen hadn't been taken to task for these relationships by many people in his party, mainly because he'd managed to cover himself fairly well. Ugh. As I digested the ramifications of this distressing information, my stomach began to ache. Only as my discomfort increased did it occur to me to wonder if my pain could also be related to my ice cream bar breakfast. A quick search of my desk turned up some sample packets of Tums my gynecologist had given me in an effort to up my calcium intake. I decided to give them a shot. Perhaps I could stave off osteoporosis and settle my stomach at the very same time. A brilliant double punch. Just when my mouth had achieved peak tablet capacity, my phone began to ring. Hello, I attempted valiantly. Hi, this is Natalie Reynolds from Senator Bremen's office. Is this Samantha Joyce? Pardon me? I took a big gulp of coffee. Sorry, this is Samantha. How can I help you? As Natalie talked about the meeting scheduled for that afternoon, I focused on how her clipped tones made her sound like a perky telemarketer, and no matter what she said, it was hard to believe she wasn't reading from a script. I happen to love telemarketers and looked forward to their calls. I found the concept of telemarketer as human being an infinitely fascinating one. Who were they? Did they enjoy their jobs? How much abuse had they endured that day? And were they appreciative that I was welcoming them with open arms? Since they were calling me and doing everything in their trained power to keep me engaged and interested in what they had to offer, I felt there was no reason I shouldn't ask them lots of questions about themselves. It was always fun to come home and have voicemails from them on my phone, and I would often call them back just to chat. I almost never actually bought anything, but I always enjoyed the conversations. Over time, I had definitely developed favorites. Zelda from the phone company was one of the stars. I had her personal extension on speed dial and called her up periodically just to check on things. She lived in Daytona, Florida, with her husband and 2 little boys, and worked the phone 60 hours a week to try and save for their kids' education. She herself had only made it through junior year of high school, though her husband had completed 2 years of college, but both of them dreamed of better things for their sons. By the time Natalie, telemarketer voice Reynolds, had finished talking, I had agreed to email her the majority of the proposal research and meet her at Senator Brayman's office in the Hart Building at 2 o'clock. There, I would work my magic to welcome the Brayman team while simultaneously protecting the integrity of the bill. There was no need to tie my stomach into knots. It was all going to be fine. If I had anything to do with it, which I did, I made a mental note to get more Tums. I planned on taking advantage of the lunch hour, parentheses hour being a euphemism for 20 minutes, close parentheses, to prettify in the event I ran into Aaron, though I understood that my plans for a future with him might be dashed if it turned out he had knowledge of his boss's crimes. Still, it didn't hurt to look good. What prettifying entailed exactly, only time and the contents of my purse would tell. I could usually count on some chapstick and a brush being in there in the very least, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. I didn't even have time to at the moment. There was way too much work to get through. I finished off my coffee and hunkered down. It was 20 minutes to 2 when I finally made it to the bathroom to assess the appearance situation. It was a dismal sight. First of all, I certainly wasn't dressed for a date, except for one with the laundromat later that evening. My knee-length skirt was wrinkled, unfortunately not in a stylish way, and my silk tank top was marred by a large soy sauce stain. I now noticed with dismay that the crop cardigan sweater I'd grabbed from the bottom of my closet to hide the soy sauce stain had a spray of spangles around the neckline. Where had this sweater come from? How had I not noticed the spangles? I was also distressed to discover that I had left my brush at home, and my hair had dried uncooperatively into a lank mini mullet. And worst of all, I had sprouted an unsightly pimple on the tip of my nose sometime in the hours since breakfast. I had felt it coming on all morning, but maintained a state of denial. Unfortunately, the mirror was no enabler. How could a pimple get so big in such a short amount of time? I had neither the tools nor the time to deal with it. I had to get over to Brayman's office. On my way down the stairs, my cell phone started blasting an orchestral version of Madonna's Like a Virgin. The tune Liza had somewhat annoyingly programmed to be her special ring. The volume was turned all the way up, and several passers-by stared at me as I fumbled for the phone. I smiled back at them like I knew exactly what I was doing, a confident attitude I felt was worthy of the immaterial girl. Hey, I can't talk now. Can I call you in a bit? Oh, too bad. I'm outside your building. I just had a picnic with Ryan on the Capitol grounds. Ryan, the bartender, had already asked her out. I was clearly behind schedule, though I doubted I'd be wowing Aaron into a date with my current look. Hang on a second, Liza. Are you right outside? Yeah, come on out. Take a break. I can't take a break, but I do need a favor. You have 3 minutes to perform a makeover using whatever you have in your purse. See you in 30 seconds. I snapped the phone shut with Liza's squeal of delight ringing in my ears. She loved any sort of contest, a trait her older brothers had exploited when they were growing up by getting her to do their share of the chores, whether it was taking out the garbage or walking the dog. just by saying that they'd time her. Though I never consciously intended to take advantage of this weakness of Liza's, I had to admit that it came in handy at times. Ralph was screening a large group of male Marines as I passed the security checkpoint on my way towards the door. The group struck me as overwhelmingly uniform in their crew-cut masculinity. They even managed to turn their heads on cue to watch me pass. I felt self-conscious and decided to take control by waving hello to Ralph. Though I still hadn't completely forgiven him for his obstructionist mockery during the Alfred Jackman incident, I knew I would need him on my side in the future, so I figured it was worth it to declare a truce in my head and resume friendliness. Ralph paused in his duties to return my wave. "You should pop that," he offered helpfully, as he pointed to the tip of his nose. Truce over. Calling attention to a woman's zit before a squadron of red-blooded young Marines was a human rights violation. I heard a few of them chuckle as I sped through the door and out into the glaring sunshine. It was a sort of late July day that wouldn't let you forget that D.C. was built on a swamp. The pungent humidity had turned the air into something viscous and swollen, and my mini mullet was quickly slicked to my neck with sweat. "Over here," Liza called from the minimal shade of a nearby tree. I checked my watch as I ran down the steps to her. 10 minutes to get to Bremen's office. Granted, the Hart building was very nearby, but I had to leave time for getting through security and negotiating the halls. "I've got a meeting I need to look good for. Erin might be there." "I'm on it," Liza replied with total seriousness. She was the best. Over the next 3 minutes, she turned our little patch of sidewalk into an emergency salon. She of course had not one, but 3 different kinds of brushes in her purse, along with various volumizing sprays and gels that she expertly spritzed and dabbed onto my limp locks. She was a whiz with these sort of products, whereas I found them too mysterious and intimidating to ever know how to even approach them. I would stare at them in the drugstore aisles like a visitor from another planet, fresh off the spaceship, curious but very, very confused. This deficiency made me all the more appreciative of Liza's mastery of all things cosmetic. She finished my hair with a satisfied nod and stepped back to survey my outfit. "I didn't notice the spangles this morning," I assured her. "Wear this instead," Liza commanded, handing over her infinitely hipper jacket and whipping out her concealer to tackle the vile uber pimple. I'm a little scared to pop it at this stage," she fretted. "I know, it could lash out unpredictably if provoked." "Exactly. I'm opting for a cover-up only, and I'll do your neck too in case the rash comes back. Stay still." Liza did what she could and was topping me off with a little blush when I opened my eyes to see Erin standing directly behind her, observing the process with a cocked head and rakish smile. "Could I get in on a little of that? My cheekbones have been dangerously undefined all morning," he said. He had his shirt sleeves rolled up and his suit jacket tossed over his shoulder. As I tried to keep my attraction in check, I noticed that his tie was bringing out the deep green of his eyes. I felt my stomach sprout wings and flutter up towards my chest. It had a nauseating effect. "Hey," I said with a tone of forced nonchalance. "Oop, gotta run," said Liza, checking her watch in a convincingly worried way. "Thanks for letting me practice on you, babe. I'll call you later. Good to see you." She waved at Erin and hurried off. "Is she a makeup artist?" Erin asked. "Of sorts," I answered, deciding to act like I had just been doing Liza a favor. "So, what are you up to?" He looked around. "Well, I'm supposed to be heading back to the office, but I could be convinced to make an ice cream cone detour if it included the right kind of company. Any interest?" I really wish I could, but I actually got to get to your office as well. Oh? He had a way of punctuating questions with his eyes. They glinted in a probing way, and his brows didn't actually lift, but they managed to suggest that they could if properly aroused. Yeah, Senator Gary sent me over to meet with Natalie now that Senator Brayman's agreed to co-sponsor the prescription drug benefit bill. And actually, I checked my watch, I'm 2 minutes late. Uh-oh, get ready to face the wrath of Natalie. Erin walked beside me towards the Hart Building. Just remember that her bite is much worse than her bark, but you look like you can handle it. I wasn't sure what I looked like. I hadn't had a chance to review Liza's work in a mirror before Erin had surprised us. I could feel my neck rash flaring and my pimple throbbing evilly on my nose, and could only hope the concealer had been up to the challenge. As I walked with Erin, I tried to identify things about him that I found unattractive. The most I could come up with was that his feet were on the small side, but there was plenty I couldn't see. Maybe he had webbed toes or something. Now that I thought about it, I thought it would be pretty cool. He dropped me outside Brayman's office door with a mock salute that would have evoked a stinging memory of Ralph's treachery had I not been so pleasantly focused on keeping my knees in a non-buckling position. He smiled and continued down the hall to a separate entrance. The receptionist put a call on hold when I entered the office. Oh, yes, Natalie's been expecting you. One moment. Been expecting me? I was 7 minutes late. That wasn't enough time to have been anything for long. I resented the word choice. Natalie swept in from a back hall, all 4 feet 11 inches of her. She had the polished veneer to match her voice, an expensive suit, manicured hands, and highlighted hair twisted into a flawless French braid. Again, did these women really accomplish such feats by themselves, using technology available to anyone? I found it hard to believe. She looked as though she was possibly made of plastic. She was blinking rapidly at me as she extended her hand. Her touch was cool and lotioned. Oh, good, I was worried you might have gotten lost, she said sweetly. Nope, not lost, just good old-fashioned late, I smiled heartily. She laughed quickly as if she didn't have time for it. Well, why don't we get started right this way? I followed her back down the hall and into a staff room filled with offices delineated by dividers. It was similar to RG's office setup, yet somewhat grander. Have a seat. She indicated a chair beside her immaculately organized desk. She turned to her computer and didn't speak for several long seconds, which had the predictable effect of triggering my babbling reflex. I lived in fear of awkward conversational lulls, even imaginary or necessary ones, and consequently rushed to fill them before they had the slightest chance of growing legs. This is a really great space, lots of light. Can you have real plants in here? I can't over my pod, I blurted frantically. Thanks, she tersely replied, apparently opting to respond to my opening compliment and ignore the rest of my outburst. She continued scrolling for something before pausing again. And what did you want to know about the plants? She looked up from her screen distractedly. I nodded, feeling idiotic. Yes, they're real. Someone else takes care of them. She returned to her work with a dismissive wave of her hand. After another 10 seconds of silence, I tried again, but in what I hoped was a more appropriate vein. We're glad to have Senator Brayman on board, I said brightly. Natalie replied. Let's just make sure it doesn't blow up in his face, shall we? Excuse me. It's a fairly good bill overall, she was continuing, but some of the language is a bit too blunt. We're going to need to put in some wiggle room for people in order to get the necessary support. No, no, no. This is a bill that was supposed to bring about real change, not another waffling half-ass attempt that would get muted into irrelevance by the end of the process. Bremen's people needed to understand that. The rush of annoyance melted the remainder of my insecurity. Actually, I believe the bill's boldness is what makes it attractive. It's very clear in its objectives, I declared. That's precisely what people won't like. Don't worry, I heard you were pretty green. These are things you learn as you go along. I stared at her as she clicked her way into some more computer files. She was maybe 32, 34 at the most. Certainly not old enough to be this condescending or cynical, in my opinion. I felt my hackles rising. Maybe people will find its clarity refreshing. I tried to keep my tone reasonable, as if I was just thoughtfully contemplating this possibility and tossing it out there. Natalie snorted. Unlike her weirdly quick laughter, this sounded more indigenous to her nature. What? I'm being serious, I said. Now I was downright indignant. Natalie fixed me with a condescending smile. Calm down, it's going to be just fine. You've done a really good job with this. It's just a little rough. We've got to polish it up before Bremen can start selling it. I resisted the urge to turn around to check for the 4-year-old she must have just been addressing. Surely that tone wasn't meant for me. Good Lord, it was. I was beginning to suspect that Natalie and I were not going to be very good friends. I spent the next few minutes contemplating the possibility that she was really an evil fembot or some other sinister futuristic machine sent to thwart the goodness of humanity. As she busied herself at the computer, I glanced around her office for clues to support this theory. Besides a few airbrushed and perfectly framed photos, and a brand new looking teddy bear wearing a t-shirt that read Grin and Bear It. Parentheses, in my head I dropped into a tight protective ball upon eye contact. Close parentheses. Natalie had very few personal effects on display. If she was indeed human, she was clearly the sort of woman who kept her work area clinical and contained. Really not the kind of person I could relate to. I tried to remind myself that she was working for a senator who was ostensibly on our side, and that so far she was just talking about tweaking the language rather than the substance of the bill. But the mechanical ickiness she oozed, even as she just sat there typing, made me shudder in spite of myself. You're cold already? I guess I'm too late. Aaron's voice snapped me out of my discomfort. I looked up to find him holding out a chocolate ice cream cone towards me. Don't tell me you haven't been secretly craving one all day. Just give me the honor of being the man to fulfill your desire. Though I was faced away from the desk and towards Aaron, I could sense the air around Natalie tighten tensely. But from my perspective, he was a welcome distraction. I smiled and decided not to tell him that in light of my Klondike bar breakfast, he would have had to have been at my apartment at 7 that morning to claim the honor of providing me my first ice cream of the day. Then I blushed as I thought about how it was he might have ended up at my apartment at 7 o'clock in the morning. Natalie's exasperated sigh broke my reverie. Aaron, we're trying to get something done here. Aaron winked at me as he turned to Natalie. I would have brought you one too, but they didn't have any fat-free yogurt, and I knew you wouldn't even consider eating anything else. Natalie must have heard him, but she didn't waver from her computer screen-absorbed posture. Go get 'em, girls, Aaron waved as he disappeared down the hall. Natalie seemed pissed off. I had nothing against fat-free yogurt. In fact, really wished I enjoyed the taste of it, and I furthermore found it annoying when effortlessly hot guys made mocking comments about women's diets, but this was a tricky case. Aaron might be my intended, and Natalie I just didn't like. Can I help with something? I asked as I licked my ice cream. She seemed to twitch at the sound of my voice. You know what? Why don't I just work on this and email you a draft later on? It wasn't a question. I made my way back to the Russell Senate building, buffeted by conflicting emotions. By the time I'd snubbed Ralph on my way to the elevator, I'd come up with a plan for dealing with Natalie. I'd wait for her to make her changes and then simply get RG's okay to shoot them down. Problem solved. Meanwhile, I was much happier about my interaction with Aaron. Even as I warned myself to be cautious, I couldn't stop grinning all afternoon. And then at 6 o'clock that evening, I received an email from him asking me out. I hesitated, but not for long. It would be stupid to turn him down just because he worked for Brayman, wouldn't it? Who cared what RG said? I wasn't going to let his paranoia dictate whom I could or couldn't date. I'd make my own decisions. I'd give Aaron a shot. I said yes to Thursday night, thanked my various gods, and began plotting my 3-day transformation into a supermodel.